I remember the exact moment my life shattered, when I realized my own parents plotted to end it all for a $4 million insurance payout. Hi, I'm Emily. I was just a daughter, a wife, a mom, trusting the people who were supposed to protect me the most. But one day, during a family picnic, a shove near the cliff's edge told me everything I needed to know. How do you rebuild your life when the ones you love betray you so deeply? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever trusted someone, only to find out they had other plans? Share your story in the comments below. I always thought that betrayals came with shouts and slamming doors. But now, I know better. They creep in quietly, slipping through tiny cracks, so small you barely notice them at first. It was a soft spring morning in Albany, Oregon. The cherry trees along our street were blooming, scattering pink petals onto the sidewalks like confetti. I parked outside Lily's elementary school, watching her jump out of the car, her backpack bouncing against her small frame. She turned around, flashing me a grin so bright it almost masked the dull ache that had been sitting in my chest for weeks. "Love you, Mommy," she called, before running off toward the entrance. I smiled and waved, waiting until she disappeared inside before pulling away. Another mother, Sandra, gave me a cheerful wave from across the lot. I waved back, exchanging a few words about the weather, how spring had finally decided to show up, how the air smelled sweet and new, but my heart wasn't in it. At work, the lab was cool and sterile, a sharp contrast to the warm morning outside. I pulled on my gloves, reviewed blood samples, logged entries with careful precision. There was comfort in the smallness of the tasks, in their clarity. No hidden meanings, no sudden betrayals. As I lined up vials by color code, a memory from years ago surfaced, uninvited. My father, Richard, once said, "Trust is the strongest stone or the sharpest blade." I used to believe him. I used to believe a lot of things. By late afternoon, the sun was beginning to dip behind the hills as I picked up Lily. She climbed into the back seat, pulling out a colorful piece of construction paper. "Look, Mommy, I made a garden," she said, holding up a drawing full of flowers, each with a smiling face. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, reaching back to squeeze her hand at a red light. "Just like you." That night, my parents invited us over for a family dinner. Richard manned the grill in the backyard, the scent of sizzling burgers filling the air. Susan set the table with checkered napkins and mismatched plates, the way she always did, claiming it added character. Monica arrived fashionably late, her designer heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. She wore a crisp white blouse and casually mentioned a recent business trip to New York while sipping from a tall glass of iced tea. I smiled and nodded in all the right places, even when she dropped hints about her meetings with some pretty big names. We all gathered around the picnic table, the evening sun casting long shadows over the yard. Lily sat beside me, carefully piling her plate with a little bit of everything. Nathan, across from me, barely touched his food. His phone buzzed against the table twice, then a third time. He glanced at it, thumb hovering, but didn't answer. He was there, but not really. As I handed Lily a napkin, Monica leaned over and said, almost too casually, "Have you ever thought about letting Lily spend a semester in Seattle with me? Great private schools, broader horizons. It could be good for her." I blinked at her, not sure I had heard correctly. "She's 6, Monica," I said, trying to keep my voice even. She smiled, that polished, professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Exactly. It's the perfect age to expose her to new opportunities." Richard nodded absently, focusing on his burger. Susan patted Lily's hair but said nothing. Nathan scrolled aimlessly on his phone, barely reacting at all. I forced a polite smile, feeling something inside me shift, a tiny hairline crack, invisible but real. After dinner, Lily chased fireflies with Susan while Monica disappeared into the house to take a quick call, and Richard pulled Nathan aside to talk about future investments. I stood alone by the grill, staring at the empty plates and melting ice cubes, wondering when family gatherings had started feeling more like performances. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep curled against her stuffed bunny, I cleaned up the living room. Nathan was already in bed, snoring lightly, his phone charging on the nightstand. I moved quietly, folding clothes that had been tossed over chairs, straightening shoes by the door. When I picked up Nathan's jacket from the back of the couch, a piece of paper slipped out and fluttered to the floor. I bent down, smoothing it open with my fingers. It was an appointment reminder. Nathan Carter and Monica Grant. Guardianship Transition Discussion. Thursday, 3 p.m. Seattle, Washington. My hands went cold. I reread it twice, 3 times, as if the words might change. I folded the paper carefully, tucking it back where I found it. Then I stood there for a long time, listening to the soft hum of the dishwasher, the distant crickets outside, and the rhythmic breathing of my sleeping daughter upstairs. Trust, my father once said, is either the strongest stone or the sharpest blade, and sometimes you don't realize which one you're holding until it's already too late. Betrayal doesn't always storm in with a bang. Sometimes it sneaks into your life like an invitation you didn't realize you accepted until it's far too late. Summer had crept into Albany without much warning. By early June, the air turned heavier, the kind that made your skin sticky and your patience thin. At Lily's school, the last few weeks before break were filled with sticky ice cream cones, sunburned noses, and restless children counting the days. At home, Nathan's absences grew longer, cloaked under the same excuse: client emergencies. He would flash a quick smile, kiss the top of Lily's head, and promise to make it up to us. At first, I believed him. That's what trust does. It makes you doubt yourself before you doubt the people you love. One Friday afternoon, I stood outside Lily's classroom, waiting as parents milled around, juggling backpacks and car keys. Mrs. Robbins approached me, her smile warm but hesitant. "Emily," she said softly, pulling me aside, "Lily mentioned something today I thought you should know." I tensed, nodding for her to continue. "She said she might be moving to a big city soon, staying with her Aunt Monica. She didn't seem upset, just a little confused." My stomach tightened. I forced a smile, thanked her, and led Lily to the car. The whole drive home, Lily hummed to herself, oblivious to the storm gathering inside me. That evening, while Lily colored at the kitchen table, I sat across from Nathan, pretending to scroll through my phone. "Mrs. Robbins said Lily's been talking about moving to Seattle," I said casually. Nathan didn't look up. "Kids say all kinds of things." "Did you tell her something?" He shrugged, finally glancing at me with that too smooth smile. "You're reading too much into it. Monica just adores her. Maybe she said something harmless." Harmless. Like the word guardianship transition printed on that slip of paper I'd found and tucked away like a guilty secret. Later that night, after Lily was tucked into bed, I sat in the living room pretending to read. Nathan was at his desk in the corner, murmuring into his phone. I caught fragments of his words. "Sooner than expected. Free ourselves. Final papers." My hands curled tightly around the book I wasn't really reading. When Nathan finally went upstairs, I stayed behind, listening to the quiet tick of the wall clock. After a long moment, I slipped into Nathan's home office. The door creaked just slightly as I eased it open. His desk was neat, almost too neat. I pulled open the top drawer and found file folders stacked meticulously. It didn't take long to find it. A legal document titled Temporary Guardianship Agreement. My name stared back at me from the header alongside Lily's, but where my signature should have been, there was only a blank line. The custodian listed Monica Grant. The document slipped from my fingers and landed soundlessly on the desk. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. I picked it up again, scanning it for any shred of hope that I had misunderstood. I hadn't. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. I quickly returned everything to its place, wiping away any trace of my intrusion. The next morning, I packed Lily's lunch as she sat at the kitchen counter, swinging her legs and chatting about a field trip to the zoo. "Mommy," she said between bites of toast. "I heard Aunt Monica telling Daddy that when we live in Seattle, we'll be free." I froze, the peanut butter knife hovering in midair. "They were whispering in the garden. I was hiding behind the rose bushes," she added proudly, as if spying had been part of a game. I forced a smile and kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for telling me, sweetheart." Trust, I thought bitterly, really was a sharp blade. By Sunday afternoon, my parents invited us to their lakeside cabin, just a half-hour's drive out of town. It was one of those invitations that wasn't really a question. Nathan claimed he had work calls and stayed behind. The sun glared off the lake as we arrived. Richard greeted me with a firm clap on the back, Susan with a quick, perfunctory hug. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and lemon cleaner, a place suspended somewhere between rustic charm and careful presentation. We sat on the back deck overlooking the water. Richard passed around cold sodas, his voice overly cheerful. "You know, Em," he said after a while, "change can be good. New places, new opportunities." Susan nodded tightly, staring out across the lake. I sipped my soda, feeling like I had missed the part where the conversation had even started. Later, as I washed my hands in the tiny guest bathroom, I heard low voices drifting from the kitchen. "She's soft. Always has been," Richard muttered. Susan's reply was muffled but sharp. "It's almost settled. Emily won't even know what hit her." I dried my hands slowly, heart pounding against my ribs. When I stepped back onto the deck, Richard and Susan were smiling too brightly, offering me a plate of fresh-baked cookies. I smiled back, my hand steady as I took one. Sometimes survival means pretending you don't hear the wolves at your door. That night, back at home, as I tucked Lily into bed, my phone buzzed. It was a group text from Richard. "Family adventure, picnic at Crater Ridge this weekend. Pack light, fun day ahead." I stared at the screen for a long time, the forced cheerfulness in the message making my skin crawl. Fun day ahead. Somewhere deep inside, I knew better. Hunters don't chase their prey with roars and flashing teeth. They lure them with bright promises. A beautiful day, a gentle path, a place to rest. The morning we left for Crater Ridge, the air was crisp and clean, the kind that promised new beginnings if you were naive enough to believe it. Lily bounced around the house in her hiking boots, clutching the tiny magnifying glass she had begged me to let her bring. "We'll find rare treasures, Mom," she said, giggling as she swung it back and forth like a pendulum. I smiled, smoothing her hair, but my stomach felt hollow. The text from Richard still sat unread on my phone, its cheerfulness souring every breath I took. We met at my parents' house just after sunrise. Richard loaded a small cooler into the trunk, oddly light for a full-day picnic. Monica, dressed in new hiking gear that still had store creases, adjusted her sunglasses with practiced ease. Susan handed Lily a small bag of trail mix, already opened. No blankets, no maps. Barely enough food for more than a few hours. I told myself maybe they planned a short hike. Maybe. But every step toward the car felt heavier. The drive up was filled with manufactured laughter and long stretches of silence. Lily sang along softly to the radio, her small voice the only real sound in the vehicle. Richard made a big show of pointing out landmarks. "That's where the old fire tower used to be. And there's a creek just down this path." Susan nodded along, her smile stretched too thin. At Crater Ridge, the parking lot was almost empty. Pine trees towered around us, their needles catching beams of morning light. Birds chattered overhead, and the faint sound of rushing water teased the edge of hearing. We set out along the main trail, but before long, Monica veered off onto a narrower path. "This way," she said brightly. "The view's incredible, and it's less crowded." I hesitated, looking at the official signs pointing toward the established trail. Richard clapped me on the shoulder. "Don't be such a worrywart, Em. It's just a shortcut." I didn't argue. Not out loud. Lily trotted ahead, magnifying glass swinging from her wrist. She stopped every few steps to marvel at a purple wildflower or a shimmering pebble, her laughter floating back to me like a lifeline. The trail narrowed further, twisting around dense patches of trees and weaving dangerously close to steep drops. The soil was dry, crumbling underfoot. Monica walked beside me, her hand brushing my elbow now and then, guiding me forward with small, insistent touches. Richard and Susan lagged behind, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. Once I caught Richard glancing toward the edge, his mouth tightening into a grim line. The view, when we reached it, was spectacular. Pines stretched endlessly, the valley below a tapestry of green and gold. A small river glinted in the distance like a silver thread. Lily gasped and ran to the overlook, holding up a leaf shaped like a perfect heart. "Look, Mommy, it's a lucky leaf!" she called, waving it proudly. I smiled, but every nerve in my body screamed. Monica stood closer now, too close. Her fingers brushed against my arm, then gripped my sleeve. "You know," she said, voice light, "sometimes life just needs a little push." Before I could react, she tightened her hold. Across the clearing, Richard knelt down, arms open, calling Lily over. "Come here, sweetheart. Come see the eagle's nest down there," he said, pointing beyond the ledge. Susan moved in closer, her hands fiddling with Lily's backpack straps. Panic flared white-hot in my chest. "Lily, stay where you are," I said sharply, starting toward her. But in that moment, Susan's hand shot out and shoved. Not Lily, me. I stumbled, rocks slipping under my boots. I caught a glimpse of Lily's wide, terrified eyes just before the world tilted and my arms flailed wildly. I managed to twist, reaching out blindly. My fingers grazed Lily's jacket, and I yanked her backward with all the strength I had left. The ground crumbled beneath me. Time fractured into jagged pieces. The screech of birds scattering, the smell of dirt and fear, and then I was falling. Falling with Lily clutched against me. Falling into the unknown. You never really know how hard you're fighting until you feel your body beginning to break. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting long, slanting beams across the rocky trail. The scent of pine needles crushed underfoot mixed with the faint iron tang of the nearby creek. Lily ran ahead, her magnifying glass swinging on its cord, stooping to examine a particularly red leaf. I turned back for a moment, catching Richard and Susan exchanging a look I couldn't quite read. Monica was at my side, smiling too brightly. "This way, Emily," she said lightly, gesturing toward a narrower path that veered off from the main trail. "The view's better over here." I hesitated, instincts clawing at me. But Lily's laugh carried back to me, and I followed. The path narrowed sharply, pine needles thick on the ground. My sneakers crunched softly with each step. The trees opened into a small clearing overlooking a steep, craggy drop-off. The valley below bathed in golden light. It should have been breathtaking. Instead, every muscle in my body tensed. Richard stood at the edge, calling Lily over. Susan smiled stiffly, holding out her hand. Monica drifted closer, her hand brushing my arm lightly, then clamping down with surprising strength. "Ever wonder," she murmured under her breath, "if life would be easier without so many attachments?" I barely had time to react before everything happened at once. Richard bent down, arms outstretched toward Lily. Monica gripped my forearm tighter. I lunged forward, reaching for Lily, who was starting to walk toward him, oblivious. Then Susan shoved me. The world tilted. My feet slipped on loose dirt. For a fraction of a second, all I could see was the blue of the sky and the terror flashing across Lily's face. I didn't think. I didn't even scream. Instinct took over. I threw myself toward Lily, grabbing her around the waist mid-air and twisting my body so I would hit the ground first. Branches snapped against my back and shoulders as we tumbled through the brush. Rocks tore at my arms, the impact jarring every bone in my body. I clutched Lily to me, trying to shield her as best I could. We landed hard at the bottom of the ravine. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. No pain, no thought. Just the dimming sky spinning overhead. Then the world rushed back all at once. Pain radiated through my shoulder and leg. My head throbbed with every heartbeat. Something warm trickled down my forehead into my eyes. A soft, terrified whimper pulled me back to reality. "Mommy?" Lily's small voice trembled against my chest. I forced my eyes open. Blood blurred my vision, but I could make out the outline of her face, smeared with dirt, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm here," I whispered, my voice raw. "I'm right here." I tried to sit up, gasping at the bolt of pain that shot through my side. Lily clung to me, her little hands gripping my shirt so tightly that the fabric tore. Above us, voices drifted down through the trees. "See anything moving?" Monica's voice thin and sharp. "No," Richard answered. "They're not moving. It's done." Susan's voice chimed in, almost sing-song. "No one's coming out here. No one will find them." I froze, instinct screaming. Lily looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. I pressed a trembling finger to my lips, signaling her to stay silent. She nodded immediately, burying her face into my chest. We lay completely still, the forest pressing down around us. I listened to the crunch of footsteps fading away, the murmur of voices growing fainter. It wasn't until the birds resumed their cautious singing that I allowed myself to breathe again. I shifted slightly, testing my limbs. My left wrist throbbed unnaturally, and my right leg refused to move properly. Broken, maybe, but alive. Lily's hair was matted with dirt, but she seemed mostly unharmed, shaken, bruised, but alive. "We're not finished yet," I whispered into her hair. Her small hand found mine in the gathering darkness, squeezing tightly. Night fell quickly under the dense canopy. The last slivers of sunlight disappeared, leaving us wrapped in shadows and the scent of damp earth. I tore a strip from the bottom of my shirt to press against the bleeding cut on my forehead. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through me, but I gritted my teeth and focused. Survive first. Everything else could come later. Above us, the world carried on as if nothing had happened. Crickets chirped. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. The air grew colder, wrapping around us like a damp blanket. I pulled Lily close, sharing what little warmth we had left. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time didn't seem to move right down there. Every sound felt magnified, the rustle of leaves, the shifting of small animals, the distant murmur of the creek. At some point, Lily fell asleep, her breath hitching softly against my side. I stayed awake, staring up through the narrow break in the trees at a handful of scattered stars. I thought about the picnic basket back at the car, packed with just 2 sandwiches and a half-empty bottle of lemonade, about the way Richard had steered us toward the cliff, about Monica's tight grip on my arm, Susan's blank smile. It wasn't an accident. It had never been an accident. They wanted us gone. My jaw tightened. I wasn't sure how we would get out of here yet, but one thing was certain. They had underestimated me. Slowly, carefully, I shifted Lily off my lap and onto the ground beside me. She stirred but didn't wake. I tore another piece of fabric from my shirt, fashioning a crude sling for my arm. Every breath hurt, but the thought of staying here, waiting to be found like a pair of forgotten shoes, hurt even more. With Lily's small hand clutching mine, I began the agonizing process of dragging us up the slope. One slow, excruciating step at a time. The earth was slick under my fingers. Pine needles pricked my palms. Rocks dug into my knees. Sweat and blood mingled on my skin, the scent of iron and earth filling my nose. But I kept going, because survival wasn't a choice anymore. It was the only thing left. You don't really know how strong you are until survival becomes the only option left on the table. The world came back to me in pieces, blinding white lights overhead, the steady beep of machines, the faint antiseptic sting of hospital soap lingering in the air. Every part of me ached, a deep, bone-heavy kind of hurt that no amount of sleep could erase. I blinked against the light, my mouth dry as dust. "Mommy?" Lily's voice was the first real thing I heard. I turned my head slowly, pain flaring along my neck and shoulders. She sat curled in a chair beside the bed, her small hands wrapped around the edge of my blanket. Her hair was messy, her face pale, but her eyes were clear, steady. "I'm here," I croaked, reaching out with my good hand. She scrambled up and pressed her forehead to mine, careful to avoid the bruises. I breathed her in, the faint smell of crayons and hospital sheets, and for the first time in days, I felt the ice inside my chest crack. A soft knock at the door broke the moment. A man in plain clothes stepped in, mid-40s, close-cropped brown hair, the kind of tired eyes that had seen too much but still hadn't given up on people. He carried a worn notebook in one hand. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently. "I'm Detective Ryan Mitchell with the Albany Police Department. You're safe now, I promise." Safe. The word felt foreign, like a coat that didn't quite fit. I nodded weakly. Mitchell pulled up a chair, setting the notebook on his knee. His voice was calm, steady, like someone talking to a frightened animal. "I need to ask you some questions about what happened at Crater Ridge." I told him everything. As much as I could remember, the shove, the fall, the voices drifting down from above, Richard, Susan, Monica, Nathan. The way survival had meant pressing my daughter's small body into mine and hoping gravity would be kind. Mitchell took it all down, nodding occasionally, asking for clarification but never rushing me. When I finished, he sat back and exhaled. "I won't lie to you," he said. "It's worse than you know." He flipped open his notebook and showed me a photocopy of a document. My name jumped off the page. 4 months ago, Nathan had updated my life insurance policy, increased it to $4 million. He listed himself as the sole beneficiary. The witness signature? Monica Grant. I stared at the paper, feeling the world tilt sideways again. Mitchell continued, his voice gentle but firm. "We also traced financial transactions. Your parents, Richard and Susan, transferred significant sums of money into Nathan's account shortly before the incident. It looks like they were helping fund the plan." My stomach turned. Betrayal didn't come with loud crashes. It seeped through silent cracks. While I tried to process it, Lily squeezed my hand tighter. "And there's more," Mitchell said. "Your daughter. She's been very brave." He smiled at Lily, who straightened up in her chair. "She told us about conversations she overheard, about Monica and Nathan planning to free themselves, about Richard telling Susan that it was almost settled." Tears pricked at my eyes, not from pain this time, but from a fierce, burning pride. "She's incredibly sharp," Mitchell said, "and she's going to be a key witness." Lily leaned forward then, fumbling through her backpack until she found a plastic hairbrush. She climbed carefully onto the bed beside me, her small fingers moving clumsily but determinedly to braid a section of my hair. We sat like that for a while, me, battered and broken, and her, piecing me back together in the only way she knew how. Mitchell gave us the space we needed, standing quietly by the window until I finally found my voice again. "What happens now?" I asked. "We're building the case," he said. "Warrants have been issued, but Nathan and Monica fled town the night you fell." He didn't say the night they tried to kill you, but we both heard it anyway. "We're closing in," Mitchell promised. "We won't let them get away with this." Before I could respond, a second knock sounded at the door. A young state trooper stepped in, his uniform crisp, his face serious. "Detective Mitchell?" he said. "We found Nathan's car, abandoned near a private airfield about 20 miles out. Looks like he tried to charter a flight under a false name." Mitchell's eyes sharpened. "Good," he said, turning back to me. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." He offered me a small, grim smile, the kind people give when they know the road ahead is still uphill. "But at least now you're walking it together." After they left, Lily crawled under the thin hospital blanket with me. I wrapped my good arm around her, holding her close, breathing in the fragile hope of her presence. The monitors beeped softly. The IV bag dripped in a slow, steady rhythm. Outside the window, the sky was starting to darken, streaked with long fingers of gold and purple. I watched the sun set, thinking about how easily things break, families, trust, bones. But as I looked down at Lily, at her fierce, stubborn little heart, I realized something else, too. Some things, once broken, come back stronger. You just have to survive long enough to see it happen. They thought burying me would be the end. They didn't realize I was a seed. Early spring arrived quietly in Evergreen Valley, Colorado. The snow hadn't fully melted yet, but here and there, stubborn green shoots pushed through the soil, claiming their place. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, and the mountains stood like quiet sentinels around us. It had been almost a year since Crater Ridge, since the fall, since I realized that the people I had trusted most were the ones who had tried to erase me. Now, sitting at a small kitchen table in a cozy cabin at the edge of town, I watched Lily draw a picture in bright crayon strokes. It was titled in bold, careful letters, "Me and Mommy's new house under the big sky." She handed it to me proudly, her smile wide, missing one of her front teeth. I smiled back, tracing the simple lines of a brown cabin under a giant blue sky filled with yellow stars. We had found a place where we could grow. In February, the trial had ended. Nathan and Monica had each been sentenced to 25 years in prison for attempted murder and conspiracy. Richard and Susan received 15 years for their roles. The courtroom had been packed with reporters and curious neighbors, but through it all, Lily had sat beside me, her small hand curled in mine, unshakable. Justice, when it finally came, didn't feel like triumph. It felt like the slow exhale of a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. Afterward, with the help of the authorities, we relocated under new identities. New town, new names, a clean slate. I found work part-time at a small clinic downtown. Dr. Matthews, the head physician, hired me after a short interview, taking one look at the steadiness in my hands and the quiet focus in my eyes. "We don't care about your past," he said simply, "only your heart." At first, I lived in constant fear that someone would recognize me, that the cracks would show. But day by day, those fears softened under the rhythms of ordinary life. Lily adapted faster than I could have dreamed. She loved her new school, where teachers praised her bright imagination and endless curiosity. She made friends quickly, coming home with pockets full of rocks and stories about playground adventures. And then there was James Parker. He was the principal at Lily's new school. Kind-eyed, soft-spoken, with a patience that wrapped around you like a well-worn quilt. At first, our conversations were brief. A nod in the hallway, a quick hello at school pickup. But little by little, words filled the spaces between us. Talk of books, of mountain trails, of the best pie in town. He swore by the blueberry at Millie's Diner. No expectations, no pressure, just quiet understanding. One afternoon, Lily pulled me aside after school and whispered, "Mr. Parker says it's okay if we want to plant a little garden next to the classroom." She beamed up at me. "Can we, Mommy? Can we grow something?" Looking down at her hopeful face, I thought about how far we had come, from the fall to the flight, from betrayal to rebuilding. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We can grow anything we want." On Lily's 7th birthday, we threw a small party in the cabin backyard. Just a few friends from school, some neighbors from the clinic, and James, who brought a homemade chocolate cake that lopsided a little on one side but tasted like a hug. The candles flickered in the breeze as everyone sang. Lily squeezed her eyes shut and made her wish, blowing out every candle with a triumphant grin. I stood back, watching her. Healthy, happy, home. And somewhere deep inside, a truth bloomed. We hadn't just survived. We had reclaimed our lives. After the party, after the dishes were stacked and the laughter faded into the walls, I stepped outside alone. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and promise. Above me, A blanket of stars stretched across the sky, endless and full of quiet light. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the solid earth beneath my feet. Once I believed my family was the soil that nurtured me. Now I know better. Real roots grow wherever love lives. I opened my eyes to the vastness above, a quiet smile tugging at my lips. Whatever came next, we were ready, not as the people we used to be, but as the people we had fought to become. As I stood under the vast Colorado sky, I realized healing isn't about forgetting the brokenness. It's about growing something stronger in its place. Sometimes, those we trust the most can hurt us the deepest. But love, real love, is patient enough to find new roots. True family isn't measured by shared blood, but by those who stay, nurture, and choose us every day. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share your thoughts, your stories of strength, healing, and second chances. Every journey matters, and sometimes just telling it can light the way for someone else.